The summer heat was beating down hard on the cracked pavement outside Thompson's Auto Repair. Maya Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stood in front of the garage, clutching a wrinkled $20 bill in her small hand. The old Honda Civic behind her looked tired, with rust spots around the wheel wells and a hood that had seen better days. Maya took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy glass door. The cool air inside hit her face, mixed with the familiar smell of motor oil and metal. 3 men in blue work shirts were scattered around the garage, tools in their hands, working on different cars. The sound of air tools and radio music filled the space. Behind the front counter sat Rick Thompson, the owner. He was a big man with thick arms and hands that looked like they had been working on cars for decades. His gray hair was messy, and his shirt had oil stains that probably had been there for weeks. He was writing something on a clipboard when Maya walked up to the counter. "Excuse me, sir," Maya said politely, her voice barely loud enough to be heard over the noise of the garage. Rick looked up slowly, his eyes taking in the 17-year-old girl standing in front of him. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, wearing oversized work clothes that looked like they belonged to someone much bigger. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her hands showed the telltale signs of someone who wasn't afraid of getting dirty. "Yeah, what do you need?" Rick asked, not bothering to put down his pen or give her his full attention. Maya cleared her throat and tried to speak with more confidence. "My car outside, the Honda, it's making some weird noises, and sometimes it won't start at all. I need to get it fixed because I use it to get to work every day." Rick glanced out the window at the old Civic and let out a small laugh. "That thing? Kid, that car is older than you are. What's wrong with it exactly?" "Well, there's this knocking sound when I start it up, and yesterday it just died in the middle of the road. I had to get my neighbor to help me push it to the side," Maya explained, her cheeks turning slightly red from embarrassment. "The engine makes this weird clicking noise too, especially when I try to go uphill." Rick put his clipboard down and leaned back in his chair, studying the young girl in front of him. "Sounds like you might have engine problems. Could be the timing, could be the pistons, could be a lot of things. How much money you got to spend on this?" Maya placed the $20 bill on the counter, smoothing out the wrinkles with her palm. "This is all I have right now, but I can get more. I work at the diner down the street and I get paid next Friday." The moment Rick saw the $20, his attitude changed completely. He picked up the bill, looked at it, and then started laughing. Not a friendly laugh, but the kind that made Maya feel small and stupid. $20? Kid, you're joking, right?" Rick's voice got louder, and the other mechanics in the garage started to look over. "My diagnostic fee alone is $45. This wouldn't even pay for me to look under your hood." Maya felt her face getting hot. "I know it's not much, but I really need this car. I have to get to work, and my mom depends on me to help with the bills. My little brother and sister need me to drive them to school when Mom works the early shift." "Oh, so now I'm supposed to feel sorry for you?" Rick stood up from his chair, and Maya realized just how big he really was. "This is a business, not a charity case. Maybe you should ask your parents for more allowance money instead of wasting my time." The other mechanics had stopped working now and were watching the conversation. One of them, a younger guy with a baseball cap, chuckled and shook his head. Another older mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and walked closer to get a better view. Maya's hands started to shake a little, but she didn't back down. "I don't get allowance money. I work for everything I have, and I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance to pay for the work." "A chance?" Rick's voice was getting meaner now. "What are you going to do, wash dishes to pay off a car repair? Do you have any idea how much it costs to fix an engine?" "I could help with the work," Maya said quietly but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I know something about cars." The garage went completely silent for a moment. Then Rick started laughing again, and this time the other mechanics joined in. The sound echoed off the concrete walls and made Maya feel like she wanted to disappear. "You? Help with car work?" Rick wiped fake tears from his eyes. "Little girl, do you even know which end of a wrench to hold?" "I know more than you think," Maya said, her voice getting stronger despite the laughter around her. "My grandfather taught me a lot about engines. I've been working on cars since I was little." "Your grandfather, huh?" Rick looked around at his crew making sure they were all listening. Let me guess, he changed oil at Jiffy Lube? The mechanics laughed again, and Maya felt anger building up inside her chest. But she also felt something else: determination. The same feeling she got when kids at school said she couldn't do something because she was too small or too young. He knew more about engines than anyone, Maya said firmly, and he taught me everything he knew. Rick walked around the counter and stood in front of Maya, looking down at her with a smug expression. Okay, I'll tell you what. Since you think you know so much about cars, let's make this interesting. He walked over to a workbench in the corner of the garage where a large engine sat completely taken apart. Parts were scattered all around it: pistons, connecting rods, valves, gaskets, and dozens of bolts and screws. It looked like a giant puzzle that someone had dumped out of the box. You see this engine? Rick pointed at the mess of metal parts. This is a V8 engine from a 1995 Chevy pickup. The customer wanted it completely rebuilt. It's been sitting here for 2 weeks because even my most experienced guys think it's going to be a pain to put back together. Maya walked over and looked at the disassembled engine. Her eyes moved from part to part, and she could almost hear her grandfather's voice in her head, explaining what each piece did and how they all worked together. Here's my deal, Rick continued, his voice getting louder so everyone in the garage could hear. If you can put this engine back together so that it actually runs, I'll fix your car for free. Everything it needs, no charge. The other mechanics gathered around now, sensing that their boss was about to provide some entertainment. The guy in the baseball cap crossed his arms and grinned. The older mechanic shook his head like he felt sorry for Maya. But Rick held up his finger with a nasty smile. When you can't even figure out which bolt goes where, you take your $20 and your broken car and get out of here. And you don't come back wasting my time with your sob stories. Maya stared at the engine parts for a long moment. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her to back down and admit she was in over her head. Part of her wanted to just leave and find another garage, maybe one where they wouldn't treat her like a joke. But then she thought about her mother working double shifts at the hospital, trying to keep the family together after her father left 3 years ago. She thought about her little brother asking why their car made scary noises, and her sister having to walk to school in the rain because Maya couldn't pick her up. Most of all, she thought about her grandfather's workshop behind his house, where he had spent countless hours teaching her about engines, showing her how every part had a purpose, how everything worked together like a team. You have a deal, Maya said, looking Rick straight in the eye. Rick's smile got even bigger. This should be good. Boys, clear some space. We're about to watch this little girl learn a lesson about the real world. Maya rolled up the sleeves of her oversized work shirt and tied her hair back tighter. She walked around the workbench studying the engine parts from different angles. The mechanics were making jokes and placing bets on how long it would take before she gave up. Need me to get you some instructions, sweetie? The guy in the baseball cap called out. Maybe a coloring book with pictures? Maya ignored him. She picked up the engine block and examined it carefully, running her fingers along the cylinder walls and checking for any cracks or damage. The metal felt familiar in her hands, like an old friend she hadn't seen in a while. Rick pulled up an old folding chair and sat down to watch the show. Take your time, kid. We've got all day to watch you make a fool of yourself. Maya took a deep breath and reached for the first piston. In her mind, she could hear her grandfather's patient voice. Remember, Maya, an engine is just a bunch of controlled explosions. Every part has to be perfect or the whole thing falls apart. She was about to show them just how much her grandfather had taught her. Maya stood in front of the scattered engine parts, her heart beating fast but her hands steady. The 3 mechanics were still chuckling and making jokes, but she blocked out their voices. In her mind, she could see her grandfather's weathered hands showing her how to identify each component, his patient voice explaining how everything fit together. She picked up the first piston and held it up to the light, examining the rings and checking for any signs of wear. The metal was smooth and clean, which was a good sign. She set it down gently and reached for the connecting rod that went with it. Look at her, she's actually going to try, said the mechanic in the baseball cap, whose name tag read, Danny. He nudged his coworker with his elbow. This is going to be better than watching TV. The older mechanic, Pete, shook his head. Poor kid doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. That engine has been giving us headaches for weeks. Rick leaned, back in his chair, arms crossed, enjoying what he thought would be a quick show. Don't worry, boys, this won't take long. Soon as she realizes she's in over her head, she'll be out of here. But Maya wasn't listening to any of them. She was completely focused on the task in front of her. She picked up each piston one by one, checking the numbers stamped on them to make sure they went with the right cylinders. Her grandfather had taught her that engines were like recipes. Everything had to be in the right order, or nothing would work. The first rule of rebuilding an engine, she whispered to herself, repeating her grandfather's words, is to make sure everything is clean. Dirt is the enemy of moving parts. She found a clean rag and started wiping down each component, even though they already looked pretty clean. But Maya knew that pretty clean wasn't good enough when it came to engines. Every speck of dust could cause problems later. Danny watched her for a few minutes, his smile slowly fading. Hey, she actually seems to know what she's doing with those pistons. Beginner's luck, Rick said, but his voice didn't sound as confident as before. Maya began laying out the parts in order, organizing them just like her grandfather had taught her. Pistons in one row, connecting rods in another, valves sorted by size, gaskets arranged by where they would go in the engine. The workbench started to look less like a mess and more like an organized workspace. She picked up the engine block again and turned it upside down, examining the crankshaft that was still inside. She ran her finger along the journals, checking for scratches or rough spots. Everything felt smooth, which meant the previous mechanic had done good work preparing it. Okay, that's actually pretty smart, Pete admitted quietly. Most people just start putting stuff together without checking anything first. Maya reached for the first piston and connecting rod assembly. She had to compress the piston rings to get them to slide into the cylinder, which required a special tool. She looked around the workbench and found the ring compressor, a metal cylinder that squeezed the rings tight against the piston. Careful with those rings, Danny called out, his teasing tone starting to change to something more like concern. If you break one, you'll have to start all over. Maya nodded but didn't look up. She slid the ring compressor over the piston and tightened it slowly, just like her grandfather had shown her. The rings compressed evenly, and the piston slid smoothly into the cylinder with a gentle tap from a rubber mallet. Not bad, Pete said, sounding surprised. She got that one in without any problems. Rick shifted in his chair, his confident smile starting to fade. He had expected Maya to struggle with the very first step, maybe break something or get frustrated and give up. Instead, she was working methodically, like someone who actually knew what they were doing. Maya continued with the remaining pistons, taking her time with each one. She double-checked the ring gaps, made sure the connecting rods were facing the right direction, and carefully torqued each bolt to the proper specification. She found the torque wrench hanging on the wall and set it to the exact number her grandfather had made her memorize years ago. How does she know the torque specs? Danny whispered to Pete. I have to look those up every time. I don't know, Pete whispered back. But she hasn't made a mistake yet. As Maya worked, the jokes and laughter from the mechanics gradually stopped. They found themselves genuinely watching her technique, curious about what she would do next. Even Rick had stopped making sarcastic comments and was leaning forward in his chair, paying closer attention. Maya moved on to the cylinder heads, which were the most complicated part of the whole job. Each head had multiple valves, springs, and rocker arms that all had to be installed in exactly the right order. She laid out all the valves on a clean towel, organizing them by size and checking each one for damage. This is where she's going to mess up, Rick said, but his voice was quieter now. The valve timing on these engines is tricky. Even my guys have trouble with it sometimes. But Maya had spent hours learning about valve timing from her grandfather. He had shown her how to read the timing marks, how to line up the camshaft with the crankshaft, and how to make sure everything turned together perfectly. She found the timing chain and stretched it out, checking for any loose or damaged links. She installed the camshaft first, making sure it was properly lubricated and seated correctly in its bearings. Then she wrapped the timing chain around the camshaft sprocket and the crankshaft sprocket, carefully lining up the timing marks that were stamped into the metal. Wait, hold on. Danny said, stepping closer to get a better look. She's got the timing marks lined up perfectly on the first try. I usually have to do that 3 or 4 times before I get it right. Pete was watching too now, his arms crossed, but his expression more interested than amused. That's not beginner's luck. She knows what those marks mean. Maya continued installing the valves, each one in its proper spot according to the firing order of the engine. She compressed the valve springs with a special tool and slipped the keepers into place, making sure each valve moved freely without binding. The garage had gotten quieter as Maya worked. The radio was still playing, but nobody was talking over it anymore. The 3 mechanics were watching her every move, and even Rick had stopped pretending to read his paperwork. "Where did you say you learned to do this?" Pete asked, his voice respectful now instead of mocking. Maya looked up from the engine for the first time in over an hour. Her face was focused and serious, with a small smudge of oil on her cheek. "My grandfather taught me. He used to say that, if you understand how something works, you can fix anything." "What kind of cars did he work on?" Pete asked. "All kinds," Maya replied, reaching for the next component. "But mostly trucks and heavy equipment. He said the principles were the same, no matter what size the engine was." Danny nodded slowly. "That's actually true. An engine is an engine, whether it's in a car or a bulldozer." Maya was now working on the oil pump, which had to be installed with exactly the right amount of clearance. Too much space, and the oil pressure would be too low. Too little space, and the pump would bind up and break. She used a feeler gauge to check the clearance, adjusting it until it was perfect. "She's checking the oil pump clearance," Pete said to Danny. "Most people skip that step." "I don't skip it," Danny protested. "Yeah, you do. I've seen you," Pete replied. "You just bolt it on and hope for the best." Rick was watching Maya's hands as she worked. Her movements were confident and precise, like someone who had done this many times before. She wasn't rushing or making sloppy mistakes. Every bolt was torqued properly, every gasket was positioned correctly, and every component was checked twice before moving on to the next step. Maya installed the oil pan next, using a thin layer of gasket sealer to make sure it wouldn't leak. She tightened the bolts in a crisscross pattern, just like her grandfather had taught her, to make sure the pan seated evenly against the engine block. "The gasket sealer," Pete observed. "She's using just the right amount, not too much, not too little." "How long has she been working on this?" Danny asked, checking his watch. "About 2.5 hours, Rick answered, his voice thoughtful. "And she hasn't stopped to ask for help once." Maya was now ready for the final major component, the intake manifold. This was the part that delivered air and fuel to each cylinder, and it had to be sealed perfectly or the engine would run poorly. She cleaned the surface carefully and applied a new gasket, making sure it was centered properly. As she lowered the intake manifold into place, all 3 mechanics held their breath. This was a heavy part, and if she dropped it or positioned it wrong, it could damage the engine or hurt her. But Maya handled it like a pro, guiding it down slowly and evenly, until it seated perfectly on the gasket. She threaded in the bolts by hand first, then used the torque wrench to tighten them to specification in the proper sequence. "Unbelievable," Danny said, shaking his head. "She just did in one try what took me all morning last week." Rick stood up from his chair and walked over to the workbench. The engine was almost completely assembled now, looking like a real motor instead of a pile of parts. And Maya had done it all without asking for help, without making any major mistakes, and without giving up when things got difficult. "How much more do you have left?" Rick asked, his voice completely different from the mocking tone he had used earlier. Maya wiped her hands on a rag and looked at the remaining parts. "Just the accessories, water pump, alternator, starter. Then we can see if it runs." For the first time since the challenge began, Rick wasn't sure what to say. Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead as she reached for the water pump. Her hands were covered in a thin layer of oil and grease, but they were steady and sure. The 3 mechanics stood around the workbench now, no longer pretending to work on other things. They were completely focused on watching her finish the engine. "Hand me that socket wrench, the 3/4 inch, Maya said to Danny, pointing at the tool rack. Danny grabbed it without thinking. then paused. Wait, how did... You know it was 3/4 inch? Most people have to try 3 different sizes before they get it right. Maya smiled for the first time since she started working. My grandfather made me memorize all the common bolt sizes. He said guessing was a waste of time when you could just learn to recognize them. She bolted the water pump into place, making sure the gasket was seated properly and the pulley lined up with the crankshaft. Every movement was deliberate and practiced, like she had done this exact job dozens of times before. Pete shook his head in amazement. I've been working on cars for 23 years and I still have to look up some of this stuff. Don't feel bad, Maya said, reaching for the alternator. My grandfather used to say that learning never stops. He was still reading repair manuals when he was 70 years old. Rick had been quiet for the last hour, just watching and thinking. The cocky smile was completely gone from his face now, replaced by something that looked like worry mixed with curiosity. This wasn't going the way he had planned at all. Maya installed the alternator and starter motor, connecting all the electrical wires in the right places. She double-checked each connection, making sure they were tight and properly insulated. Her grandfather had always been very careful about electrical work, saying that a loose wire could burn down a whole garage. Okay, Maya announced, stepping back from the completed engine. I think it's ready to test. The garage fell silent. Everyone stared at the engine, which now looked exactly like it should. All the parts in the right places, everything connected. Properly, no loose bolts or missing pieces. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago it had been nothing but scattered parts on a workbench. Rick walked around the engine slowly, examining Maya's work from every angle. He was looking for any excuse to find something wrong, any reason to claim that she hadn't really completed the challenge, but everywhere he looked, the work was perfect. He checked the torque on several bolts with his own wrench. They were all exactly right. He examined the gasket seals, looking for any signs that they might leak. Everything was properly installed. He even checked the timing marks on the camshaft and crankshaft, and they were lined up perfectly. Well? Maya asked, crossing her arms and looking directly at Rick. Are you going to test it, or are you going to keep looking for problems that aren't there? Rick's face turned red. He wasn't used to being challenged by anyone, especially not by a 17-year-old girl. But he couldn't argue with what he was seeing. The engine was assembled correctly, and he had promised to test it if she could. Put it together. Danny, help me get this thing on the engine stand, Rick said reluctantly. We'll need to hook up some temporary fuel and cooling lines to run it. It took about 30 minutes to get the engine properly mounted and connected to the test equipment. Maya watched every step, making sure they didn't accidentally damage anything she had worked so hard to build. Several times she pointed out better ways to route the cables or position the engine, and Rick found himself following her suggestions without argument. Finally, everything was ready. Rick stood next to the engine with his hand on the starter switch, looking like he was about to flip a coin that would decide his fate. If the engine started and ran well, he would have to admit that a teenage girl had just outperformed his experienced mechanics. If it didn't start, he could claim victory and send Maya away. Everyone ready? Rick asked, his voice tense. Maya nodded. Pete and Danny stepped back to give the engine room, both of them looking nervous and excited at the same time. The whole garage seemed to be holding its breath. Rick pressed the starter button. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. Then suddenly it caught, and the sound of a perfectly tuned V8 engine filled the garage. It wasn't the rough, uneven sound of an engine that was just barely running. It was smooth and strong, purring like a giant cat. Danny's mouth fell open. Holy cow, it sounds perfect. Pete was nodding his head in amazement. Listen to that idle, it's as smooth as silk. Rick let the engine run for several minutes, checking the oil pressure gauge and listening to every sound it made. He was looking for any sign of problems, unusual noises, rough idling, oil leaks, anything that would let him claim the engine wasn't properly rebuilt. But there was nothing wrong with it. The oil pressure was exactly where it should be. The engine ran smoothly at idle and revved cleanly when Rick pressed the throttle. There were no strange noises, no leaks, no problems of any kind. Turn it off, Maya said calmly. You don't want to run it too long without a proper cooling system. Rick switched off the engine and the garage became quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now, the silence of three grown men who had just been completely schooled by a teenager they had been making fun of just a few hours earlier. "Well," Pete said finally, "I guess that settles that." Danny was still staring at the engine. "I can't believe she put that whole thing together in one afternoon. It would have taken me at least 2 days, maybe 3. Rick was looking at Maya with a completely different expression now. The mockery and condescension were gone, replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with embarrassment. He had been so sure that she would fail, so confident that he could humiliate her and send her away. Instead, she had just proved that she knew more about engines than he had given her credit for. "Okay," Rick said slowly, his voice much quieter than before. "You win. I'll fix your car for free just like I promised." But Maya wasn't finished yet. She had been holding back her anger for hours, staying focused on the work instead of responding to the insults and jokes. Now that she had proved her point, she was ready to let them know exactly who they had been dealing with. "Before you fix my car," Maya said, her voice steady, but with an edge to it, "I think you deserve to know where I learned to do all this." Rick looked uncomfortable. "Look, kid, you obviously know what you're doing. Your grandfather must have been a pretty good mechanic." "My grandfather," Maya said, emphasizing each word, "was Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, United States Army. He spent 30 years maintaining military vehicles, everything from Humvees to Apache helicopters to M1 Abrams tanks." The three mechanics exchanged glances. Military mechanics had a reputation for being among the best in the world. When your engine breaks down in the middle of a combat zone, there's no room for mistakes. Maya continued, her voice getting stronger. He worked on engines that had to run perfectly in the desert, in the jungle, in places where one mechanical failure could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers depending on those vehicles. Danny whistled softly. "Army mechanics, don't mess around. Those guys know their stuff." "He started teaching me when I was 8 years old," Maya went on. "Every weekend we would work in his garage behind his house. He taught me that an engine is just a machine and machines follow rules. If you understand the rules and follow them exactly, the machine will work every time." Pete was nodding slowly. "That makes sense. Military training is all about doing things the right way, every time." "He made me practice the same procedures over and over until I could do them perfectly," Maya said. "He said that knowledge didn't care about your age, your size, or what other people thought you should be able to do. Knowledge only cared about whether you were willing to learn and whether you were willing to work hard." Rick was starting to look more and more uncomfortable. He was beginning to realize that he hadn't just underestimated a random teenager. He had insulted the granddaughter of a decorated military veteran who had passed on decades of expertise to her. "He taught me that respect is something you earn," Maya continued, looking directly at Rick, "and that you should never judge someone's abilities based on what they look like or how old they are." The garage was completely silent now. Maya's words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone knew she was talking about more than just fixing engines. "My grandfather passed away last year," Maya said, her voice getting softer. "Cancer. But before he died, he made sure I knew everything he could teach me. He said that someday I might need those skills to take care of myself and my family." Danny looked down at his feet, suddenly ashamed of the jokes he had been making earlier. Pete was staring at the completed engine, probably thinking about all the times he had dismissed someone without giving them a chance. This garage, Maya said, was his favorite place to buy parts when the military surplus store didn't have what he needed. He always said Rick Thompson ran an honest shop and treated his customers fairly. Rick's face went completely white. Maya's grandfather had been a customer, someone he had known and respected, and he had just spent the afternoon humiliating that man's granddaughter. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," Rick said quietly. "Big guy, always wore his old army jacket. Drove that green pickup truck?" Maya nodded. "That was him." Rick sat down heavily in his chair, putting his head in his hands. "Oh no, oh no, no, no. He was a good man. He helped me out more than once when I was short on cash. Never asked for anything in return." "He always said you were a good person," Maya said. He just thought you had forgotten how to treat people with respect. The words hit Rick like a punch to the stomach. He looked up at Maya, seeing her not as the teenager he had been mocking, but as the granddaughter of a man he had genuinely liked and admired. "I'm sorry," Rick said. And for the first time all day, he sounded like he really meant it. "I had no right to treat you that way. Your grandfather would be proud of what you just did." Maya nodded once, accepting his apology but not letting him off the hook completely. He would also be disappointed in how long it took you to realize your mistake. The silence in the garage stretched on for what felt like forever. Rick sat in his chair, still processing the fact that he had just humiliated the granddaughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, a man he had genuinely respected and considered a friend. The weight of his mistake was settling on him like a heavy blanket. Maya stood next to the perfectly rebuilt engine, her arms crossed, waiting to see what Rick would do next. She had proven her point completely, but she wasn't sure if that would be enough to change anything. In her experience, adults didn't like admitting when they were wrong, especially in front of other people. Pete broke the silence first. "Maya, I owe you an apology too. I was laughing right along with everyone else, and that wasn't right. Your grandfather taught you well." Danny nodded, taking off his baseball cap and running his hand through his hair. "Yeah, me too. I feel like a complete jerk now. You know more about engines than I do, and I've been doing this for 5 years. Maya looked at both of them, seeing genuine regret in their faces. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I'm used to people not taking me seriously at first, but I'm not used to people being mean about it." Rick finally stood up from his chair and walked over to Maya's Honda Civic, which was still parked outside. He popped the hood and spent several minutes examining the engine, listening to the sounds it made, checking fluid levels and connections. When he came back inside, his expression was thoughtful. "Your car needs a new timing belt, new spark plugs, and the idle control valve is going bad," Rick announced. "The knocking sound you're hearing is probably carbon buildup in the cylinders. Nothing too serious, but it needs attention." "How much will that cost?" Maya asked, even though Rick had already promised to fix it for free. "For anyone else?" "About $400 in parts and labor," Rick said. "But I made you a deal and I'm going to stick to it. The work is free." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. $400 was more money than her family had for car repairs, and without the Honda, she would lose her job at the diner. That would mean less money for groceries, less help with the bills, and more stress for her mother, who was already working as many hours as she could get. "Thank you," Maya said simply. Rick nodded, but he still looked uncomfortable. "It's the least I can do after the way I treated you. Your grandfather was always straight with me, never tried to cheat me or waste my time. I should have given you the same respect." "There's something else," Rick continued, his voice getting more confident as he made up his mind about something. "I've been thinking about what happened here today, and I have a proposition for you." Maya raised an eyebrow, not sure where this was going. "I need help in this shop," Rick said. "Good help. Someone who actually knows what they're doing and takes pride in their work. Would you be interested in a part-time job?" The question caught Maya completely off guard. She had come in hoping to get her car fixed cheaply, and now she was being offered a job at the same place where she had been laughed at just a few hours earlier. "I don't know," Maya said slowly. "I already work at the diner and I have school. Weekends and maybe a few hours after school when you can manage it," Rick said. "The pay would be better than the diner, and you'd be learning skills that could help you for the rest of your life." Pete and Danny were both nodding enthusiastically. "You should do it," Pete said. "We could learn a lot from you too. Your grandfather's techniques are better than some of the shortcuts we've been using. And honestly," Danny added, "it would be nice to work with someone who actually cares about doing things right instead of just getting them done fast." Maya thought about it for a moment. The extra money would definitely help her family, and she had always loved working on engines. But she was still hurt by the way they had treated her, and she wasn't sure if she could trust them to be respectful going forward. "If I took the job," Maya said carefully, "things would have to be different. No more jokes about what girls can or can't do. No more assuming I don't know something just because I'm young. I want to be treated like any other mechanic." "Absolutely," Rick said immediately. "In fact, I think working with you might help all of us remember what it means to be professional." "And," Maya continued, "I want to be able to teach other people what my grandfather taught me. Maybe some of the younger kids in town who are interested in learning about cars but don't have anyone to show them." Rick's face lit up. "You know, what? That's a great idea. We could start some kind of weekend program for kids who want to learn basic car maintenance. Your grandfather would have loved something like that." Maya smiled for the first time since the whole ordeal began. He really would have. He always said that knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. "So is that a yes?" Rick asked. Maya looked around the garage, at the engine she had just rebuilt, at Pete and Danny who were looking at her with genuine respect now, at Rick who seemed like a completely different person than the one who had mocked her a few hours earlier. "Yes," she said, "but I start after you fix my car." Rick laughed, a real laugh this time instead of the mean one from earlier. "Deal. Pete, get started on that Honda. I want it running perfectly by tomorrow morning." Over the next few weeks, word spread quickly through the small town about what had happened at Thompson's Auto Repair. The story got bigger with each telling. The teenage girl who had embarrassed the local garage owner, the military grandfather who had trained her, the perfect engine rebuild that had shocked everyone. Some people came by the garage just to meet Maya and see if the stories were true. Others brought their cars specifically because they wanted the girl with the army training to work on them. Rick found that business was actually getting better, not worse, because of what had happened. Maya settled into her new routine quickly. She worked at the diner on weekday afternoons and at the garage on weekends. The extra money was making a real difference for her family. They were able to catch up on some bills, buy better groceries, and even start saving a little bit for the future. More importantly, Maya was loving the work. Every engine was like a puzzle to solve, and she was getting better and better at diagnosing problems quickly and efficiently. Rick started giving her some of the more complicated jobs, the ideas ones that had been sitting around because none of the other mechanics wanted to tackle them. Pete and Danny had become genuine friends and colleagues. They asked her opinion on difficult repairs, shared their own knowledge and experience, and treated her exactly like they would treat any other skilled mechanic. The atmosphere in the garage was more positive and professional than it had been in years. 3 months after the engine challenge, Rick made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Maya, I want you to know that you've brought something special to this shop. Not just your skills, but your attitude about doing things the right way." "Thank you," Maya said, wiping her hands on a clean rag. "My grandfather always said that good work speaks for itself." "Well, your work has been speaking pretty loudly," Rick continued. "I've decided to make you a full partner in the weekend youth program we talked about, and I want to put up a memorial in the shop to honor your grandfather's service and his contributions to this community." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. He would have been so proud. Rick walked over to the wall near the main workbench and pointed to a spot where he had hung a small brass plaque. Maya walked over to read it, and her heart swelled with pride and sadness at the same time. The plaque read, "In memory of Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, United States Army. A skilled mechanic, a dedicated soldier, and a teacher who believed that knowledge and respect should be earned through hard work and shared freely with others. His legacy lives on through the hands he trained and the lives he touched. Every young person who comes through our program will see that," Rick said, "and they'll learn not just about fixing engines but about treating people with dignity and respect." Maya ran her fingers over the words on the plaque, thinking about all the hours she had spent in her grandfather's garage, learning not just about mechanical work but about life, character, and the importance of never giving up. "There's one more thing," Rick said, his voice getting more serious. "I've been talking to some people at the community college. They have an automotive program that could help you get certified as a professional mechanic. If you're interested, I'd be happy to write you a recommendation letter." Maya looked around the garage that had become like a second home to her. 6 months ago, she had been just a teenager with a broken car and $20 to her name. Now, she had a job she loved, the respect of her colleagues, and opportunities she had never dreamed of. My grandfather always said that learning never stops, Maya said with a smile. I think he'd want me to keep learning everything I can. Then, it's settled, Rick said. Thompson's Auto Repair is proud to support our first scholarship student. As Maya looked at the memorial plaque one more time, she could almost hear her grandfather's voice. Remember, Maya, it's not about proving you're better than anyone else. It's about proving to yourself that you can handle whatever life throws at you. She had done exactly that, and this was just the beginning.